Okay. So I'm going to introduce Missy McLean, and Missy is going to do some questions and conversation with our speaker tonight, Tara, and then we're going to open up the chat and the Q&A for questions. And Tara is going to share about the book that she's written, and I'll let them get into all of that. So Missy is one of our board members from Ontario. Missy joined Mom Stop the Harm in 2020 out of a desire to work with like-minded people across the country who want to see an end to failed racist drug policies and to envision a society where people who use drugs are valued, respected, and empowered to their lives, living free of stigma with dignity, autonomy, and safety. After more than 15 years in working public relations and communications, she's now making a career change inspired by her growing advocacy, activism, and volunteer work. She is completing a degree in social work at Trent University in Durham, GTA, and developing a practice rooted in social justice, anti-oppression, harm reduction, and sorry, I'm just looking at that word,
Abolition.
Yes, thanks, Missy.
Yeah, no worries.
And Missy is also a facilitator for our Healing Hearts and Holding Hope in the county of Northumberland and in Cobourg. So our Healing Hearts is the support group that we have across Canada that supports families who have lost a loved one due to substance-related death, and Holding Hope is for those that have a loved one still struggling. And so I'm going to pass it over to you, Missy.
Thanks so much, Antoinette. And you just reminded me that I need to update my bio because I'm graduated. I'm done school. I'm a full-fledged social worker. And, yeah, thank you. Working. So yeah, I got to get that bio updated for sure. It's a real pleasure to be here this evening. I'm joining from the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Chippewa nations on the lands that are governed by very problematic Williams treaties. And the town where I live is, colonially known as Cobourg, about an hour east of Toronto in Ontario. So that's where I am located this evening. And I want to, before we dive into the conversation, I want to introduce you to our guest this evening, who I now call a very dear friend. And so I'll just share a little bit for those of you who aren't familiar with Tara McGuire. She is a writer, an author, as well as a former broadcaster, whose essays and poetry have appeared on CBC Radio and in publications like Geist, The Tyee, and the Globe and Mail. She's a graduate of the Writers' Studio at Simon Fraser University and holds an MFA from the UBC School of Creative Writing. And Holden, After and Before, if you don't have your copy already, I know you will after this, is her first book. And as you might already know, or will soon find out, this is a remarkable hybrid work in memoir and fiction that explores grief, motherhood, and the overdose crisis. And so I'm really, really pleased to be in conversation with my friend Tara McGuire again tonight. Hi, Tara.
Hi, Missy. This is our third time speaking together. I met Missy. This is a reverse introduction. I met Missy when I knew I was doing a book tour and I was going to Ontario, and I thought, who could I kind of connect with in Ontario? And I just found Missy sort of by happenstance through the Mom Stop the Harm website and some YouTube videos and things. But since then, I am also really delighted to call Missy a very good friend. I was really treated well while I was there in Toronto, and it's difficult to talk about these things, and Missy, you made it so much easier. So I want to thank you and all of the support that this work has had so far from Mom Stop the Harm and groups like Stronger Together Canada. And here in BC, we're the hotbed really of the overdose crisis. Our statistics here in BC are the worst. Not that that's anything to brag about, but it does seem to be. I was just down in the downtown east side today. I went down to do some other work, and I always take a few spins around a few blocks looking for people who are loved and who are missing. So anyway, I got a little off track there, but I am speaking to you from what's known as North Vancouver, closest to the Squamish Nation, which I drive through every day. And most of this work was completed on the unceded and ancestral lands of the Musqueam and Tsleil-Waututh people, lots of different Coast Salish Indigenous peoples here in British Columbia struggling with colonialism and these same problems that seem to haunt disproportionately our Indigenous people. So I'm really glad to recognize that fact tonight.
Thanks for naming all of that. Yeah. And thanks for taking those spins around downtown when you do.
Yep.
So you said this is our third time being in conversation with each other. We got to keep it fresh. So,
Shake it up.
Take it
I
up.
put on mascara.
We're already hitting the ground running. So I thought, I want to start from maybe a slightly different place tonight from than where we've sort of entered into our conversations before. And so in the book, there is a quote that's opposite the first page. And it says, "Mothers are all slightly insane." Can we start there?
Yeah, sure. Let's start there. I mean, motherhood does have a way of pushing you about as far as you can go, in my experience. Actually, even before Holden died, motherhood is, I think, the most difficult occupation in that it occupies us completely and fully. That is a quote from Holden Caulfield in the J.D. Salinger book, The Catcher in the Rye. And he's talking about his own mother and her concern for him and the way that her concern shows up for him, which is not very, he doesn't like it very much. Let's just put it that way. I think this book and a lot of the work that all of you are doing is based in motherhood and how seriously we take.
I can't get on here. Oh.
And how seriously we take the job. And I think that the act of mothering has a way of entering all different parts of your body and your psyche. And when that is disrupted through a very shocking and out of sequence loss, like I and many of you have experienced, it does have a way of making us either temporarily or permanently insane. I'm not sure, but not that that's a bad thing. I think that is a very natural response to losing a child in this way.
Yeah. And just before we sort of started letting folks into the room, you were talking about a conversation you had with a grief podcast, like a podcast that's all about grief called Grief Stories. Yeah. And the way that the host and the conversation you and the host were having about grief and its madness making.
Yeah, I took some notes during that podcast. It wasn't very long ago. It was a woman in Ontario, Maureen Pollard, and she talked about integration, which was a really important word for me because so often it's either get over it or stay with it. We sort of are pushed into making a choice. And she told me about integration, and I'm familiar with the word, but I didn't really understand the word in the context of having to live with this kind of grief related to motherhood for the rest of my life. And what the concept of integration allows is, yes, to have the grief rise and fall and encompass you, and some days almost completely disappear, and respect that. And at the same time, be allowed to have your life. And for a long time, I felt that having my own life would be in some way disrespectful or devaluing what had happened with Holden, or be a sign of forgetting about him. And that word integration, to me, made it possible to do things like write this book where Holden is very present in third person present tense. I intentionally wrote him on the pages in present tense so that he would be present and that he could continue to live in the way that a person or a character can live on the page of a book. I mean, I have a lot of books where the characters that I've learned about and lived with while I've been reading the book have stayed with me as real people. And so one of the things that some people might consider to be a little wacko is that I often sometimes still talk about Holden in the present tense. And I think that's okay. Again, I think that's a pretty reasonable response because they are so present for us. They're not going anywhere.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, if I just build on what you just said, Tara, is, especially in our, like in the Healing Hearts groups the Healing Hearts group that I facilitate, and I'm sure in some of the other ones across the country, we do talk about that integration. We often talk about how like one of our most hated phrases is, to move on, or to have closure. And we're like, not sure that's going to happen. But what we like, just like what you and Maureen were talking about, we're not going to move on from our loved one. But yeah, we can learn to integrate the loss and to carry that loss with us and to find ways to maybe, make it lighter on the journey as much as possible, recognizing, like you said, that there are going to be days when the weight is overwhelming and our knees buckle under it. And that's okay too. And a lot of the conversations are around removing the judgment of how we grieve and how we move through, and who's to say, what makes talking about our loved one in the present tense, who's to say that isn't possible, shouldn't be. Yeah. I can't wait to listen to that episode. So I'm so glad that you shared about it. Thank you.
Oh yeah, my pleasure.
So maybe, we have a lot of folks in this space who have experienced loss, but I'm guessing very few, if any, have written a book about it. And so I'm wondering if we can talk a little bit about that process of like, when did you decide that you wanted to write the book, or maybe when you decided you needed to write the book? What was the emotion that was tied, or the driving emotion behind it, and how you got to that point?
Yeah, for me, writing has been a way to process my thoughts and to help me understand how I feel about things, or perhaps put them someplace else other than in my brain. And so putting things down on paper has always been very helpful for me, whether that's just a very awful poems or, and by awful, I just mean not that good. Poetry is very difficult. But I was encouraged by people who had also experienced grief. And one very good friend in particular, who's a writer, she encouraged me to take a couple of smaller workshops. And I found somehow that I could continue my conversation with my son through writing about him in sort of first person essay form. But then when I started writing fiction, I felt, and this is again sort of crazy, that he could talk back to me through that fictional form. And so this book has had a variety of different structures. At one point, it was an alternating structure where I could sort of ask questions and explore, why did this happen? What was it about my parenting? What was it about your upbringing? What was it about our society? What is it about mental health? What is it about maybe I had a few beers while I was breastfeeding? All of those. What is it about Holden had a hand surgery and he was given hydromorphone, well, after the surgery, all of those questions. He had a number of concussions. Like everyone, I was always trying to figure out, why did this happen? And I was able to explore all of the questions I had as an artist. And of course, I explored them also with my therapist and with friends and with family and that kind of thing. But to be able to write it down and revisit it over and over and over through the creative process over 5 years, somewhere along that journey, I realized that this might be a book that could be beneficial for others. And that was maybe pushing at some universal truths around issues that are troubling many, many, many people. And so, I was scared to write it. I still am kind of scared about people reading it, because you can't really do anything about how your work is received as an artist. I put it out there with the best of intentions, and I wrote it from a place of love, but art can be interpreted in any number of ways. So in terms of realizing when it was a book, I would say probably about halfway through my master's program, when we have to write a thesis, and I was trying to build this book, and then I realized, through the encouragement of a lot of very talented and generous teachers, that it might be a book.
Oh, it is a book. It is a beautiful book. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And there's a lot of different pieces of what you just said that I want to sort of come back to, or we might jump around a little bit, but it says it right on the cover, right, of the book, that this is a love letter to Holden. And it's memoir form, but like you said, it's a hybrid, right? It's you break from just the traditional memoir, and you go to another place in your writing, a really I think unique, uncommon place. And there's almost there is an element of fiction to it, right? Like a historical fiction, and the history is Holden's, which is what I think is so special about it. And so I'm wondering if you can talk to us. I mean, you did get into it a bit, but many of us in this room have lost someone suddenly like this, and I'm sure we'll probably hear in the chat and in the questions later, maybe people can confirm in the chat or validate this, but many of us have sort of conjured conversations with our loved one, ones we had, like remembering ones we had, maybe ones we wish we'd had, or we could have had with them, maybe ones we regret having. But I'm not sure many people have dared to really inhabit their person's voice, right? And their head and their heart.
Yeah. And
so can you talk to us about what that process was like to inhabit Holden?
Yeah, it was difficult. It was very difficult. Of course, he's a young man and I'm a woman of a certain age, and we think in very, very different ways. However, I know him quite well. I know his history, at least most of it. I know his influences, and I did a lot of research. I went to a lot of places where he had been. I spoke to many of his friends and coworkers and girlfriends, and I listened to his music, and I read his books, his pile of books, and I tried to go to places that he enjoyed being. Holden was a graffiti artist, very prolific graffiti artist. So I went around and documented a lot of his graffiti work, and I just tried to excavate him in any way that I could. And then with those pieces is where I jumped into fiction. For example, I know that on the last day of Holden's life, he was in jail. He spent a night in jail because he shoplifted. And then a few bizarre things happened and he was arrested and he spent the night in jail. I don't know what it was like for Holden there, but I went there with my husband, bless his heart, And we were taken all the way through and shown all the procedures and the rooms and what would happen and what they would be given to eat and how they would be offered medications and all of that. And so I was able to write a scene, putting Holden in that scene based on the research that I had done. So yes, I appropriated his voice and his humor and his intelligence and his language, but I did it in a calculated way based on evidence, photographs, text messages, interviews, things like that. And also in the book, if you haven't read it yet, I make it very clear that we are now jumping into fiction. Like, here's another made up section, or, this is perhaps something that could have happened. I'm not saying that these things happened. I know they didn't happen, but he got from one place to another place somehow. And that's what I really kind of enjoyed exploring, because I just really sat down at my desk and ask myself questions. And often I would ask, what would it have been like, for example, what would it have been like for Holden to be spray painting a huge wall? How would he have felt? What would he have smelled? What would he have looked at? What would he have seen based on, being an art student and being with a friend and caring about people and loving the ocean and the landscape? I really tried to embody him as fully as I could.
I think, that research and that piecing together, that's something that I wanted to talk about for a minute. And I know we'll have, I'm going to invite you to read something in a little bit, but first, can I read something to you that you wrote?
Oh, wow, yeah, I'd love that.
I'm really changing it up tonight, I told you.
Yeah,
So
I like it.
in that first, really, I'm going to say really difficult chapter, right? There's a part where you start to describe this process, right, that you undertake. And you said, there is no way to make sense of Holden's gaping absence, but I have too much love left unspent to let him be. So I dig. I assume and I sleuth and I speculate and I make phone calls. I close my eyes and wonder where it all began. I obsess. I think too much and loop back and zigzag like a hound on a scent. At times I see it all as if I were there. Like, I am guessing there are so many people in this room who will be like, yes, yes, yes. Those words are digging right into our hearts, right? Because that compulsion to go back, to retrace all of the steps, to pick through all the pieces and try to see what we missed, right? Or to put it all together is really relatable. It's such a relatable part of the story of the book. And it's that aspect of the book that I've reflected on a lot. And what I think about a lot with it is in that sleuthing, there's a theme also of like distance and proximity that sort of comes out in your journey. There's this, I guess I want to talk about that theme of like distance and closeness. And maybe I'm jumping too much all over the place, but there's the presence of like real physical distance in your book, right? Because for the last year of Holden's life, you were actually physically distanced from him because you were traveling the world. You and Cam, your husband Cam, and Lila, your daughter Lila, you were having this beautiful trip. And so there's this real distance, and then there's also this presence of this distance between you and Holden for so many years that you are picking through and trying to understand. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I'm just wondering, I feel like a lot of families can relate to that emotional distance. Mm-hmm. And can you, I don't know, do you want to talk anything about the differences or the overlap between the physical distance and the emotional distance and those pieces?
Yeah, that's actually really perceptive. I hadn't really thought about that before, but it's so true. When someone is struggling, often they're not feeling very good about themselves, so they don't want to allow anyone closer. I know I've pushed people away. And so I think as a parent, when you can see someone that you love struggling, you want to get closer. And then there's this funny dance that happens where you want to get closer and you know they want you in, but there's some kind of bizarre human mechanism that is very counterintuitive that makes people push away when they need help the most. And I think that that's a really painful place to be. So I tried to explore that in structural ways in the book, in terms of, yes, obviously we were at times about as far away as you can get. You know what, I think when I really was having very strong feelings that something was wrong with Holden intuitively, I was in a hurricane in Mauritius, which is in the middle of the Indian Ocean, a tiny little island. And I don't think you can get farther away from Vancouver. And that didn't feel as far away as I felt emotionally from him at that time. You know, and that is a painful place to be. And so I tried to evoke that in the book as well. And also the very, very physical closeness. We came back from our trip. Actually, it was my daughter Lila's idea. She really, it was her idea to come back. Thank God. We came back, we saw Holden. I held him in my arms. We talked, he was well. And that is the last time I saw him, you know? So yeah, that elastic band has been through the ringer.
Yeah. Thanks for going through all of that, for sharing that. And part of the reason why I wanted to raise that, the physical distance and that piece of that sort of stretch of time where the physical distance was happening, is to then bring it back to where you find yourself going into your sleuthing mode, trying to uncover, you know, specifically maybe that past year, even parts before, like you talked about, going right back to childhood, but that year as a lot too. And so there's this, there's the part in chapter 7 where there's another event that I think a lot of families will know to be familiar, right? And that's that arrival of a box. And that arrival of the box can be, you know, horrifying, can be weirdly comforting for some people. Still surprising to me how many families have the same experience, even though everyone's situation is unique. But the arrival of the banker's box to your home, that your friend brings to your home, the passing back of Holden's belongings, right, from the coroner's office. Mm-hmm. It's a turning point for you in a lot of ways, because you open it and in there is one particular item that's like a key. It's like part key and it's like part grenade.
Yeah.
Almost, right? Is how I started to think about it.
Yeah.
And gift, like all wrapped up into one, and it's Holden's cell phone. And so I'm wondering if you can talk to us about, like, how did you decide what to do with it? And what was the significance of the phone in your writing?
I can read that part if you like. I know we had talked about reading.
Love that.
Just read a little part of it. I will say, I can see that there are 32 people watching. If this might be too painful for you to listen to, I fully understand if you want to go away.
We did have a request for you to read some of in your book, so I had responded that was part of the plan for tonight. So, but absolutely. And I just wanted to say that, to make sure that people do what they need to do for self-care. If you need to step away, if you need to, we are recording, so if you need to, you know, step away and come back and listen when you're able to. If you want to put things in the chat, like, absolutely. So
I think I'll read for probably 5 or 6 minutes, if that's okay, and then you can come back. When Holden died, A fragile hush came over our house, as though the air might crack if anyone spoke too loudly. Very much like when the children had been born, people came and went in a tender stream, not staying long, bringing with them flowers, food, and emotions. A month or two later, Sean, the close friend we had shared our sailboat with, a tough ex-cop who had always packed a broad smile and a dirty joke, delivered something else, a cardboard banker's box. He had retrieved it for us at the coroner's instruction from the warehouse where the Vancouver police keep evidence. Maybe just put that away for later, he said, arching his bushy eyebrows at Cam, that's my husband, who sat at the kitchen counter with a cup of strong coffee in the ceramic mug he'd chosen in Italy, the one souvenir he'd bought on our trip and carried for months in his pack, wrapped in a t-shirt. Sean had worked in homicide for years and understood the collateral agonies of a death in the family. He knew from experience that opening the box was a bad idea. He also encouraged us to request a full autopsy, advice which, months later, I wished I had followed. My first reflex was to tear the lid off and see what was inside, or rather, what of Holden was inside. Was there something that would lead me to him? I was desperate for some kind of clerical error that would make Holden's death untrue, some kind of glitch in the system that would void what had happened and allow us to hit reset. I flipped open the lid and saw that the box was filled with brown paper bags and envelopes of assorted sizes, each with a detailed label. My chest contracted. I sucked in a breath and held it as if I were about to dive underwater. These objects were all that was left of him. Cam and Sean eyed each other, their lips whitening with pressure. Passport, one of the labels said in official type, followed by serial numbers and dates. I guessed he must have lost his driver's license and needed to carry his passport for ID. Bank card, declared another. Keys. Cigarettes. Wait, cigarettes? Another habit I hadn't known about. Socks. Holden's last personal effects lay on the kitchen table. The earthy smell of him rose into my nostrils. I could see the corner of his black backpack and his work boots at the bottom of the box. I closed my eyes. Are you sure you want to do that now? From across the top of the box, Cam's rough fingers stroked my hand. I mean, maybe you could just think about it for a while. Cam knew better than anyone what digging through the contents could do. He was the one who held me while I pressed the sheets Holden had slept on to my face and sobbed. He knew the triggering effects of certain songs on the radio, of photographs, of a bagel with peanut butter. He could never be sure when a cup of tea was no longer just a cup of tea, when a cup of tea became Holden drinking a cup of tea at our kitchen counter the last time we saw him, when a book became a mistake I'd made, or a leaf falling from a tree became a small blonde boy jumping through a pile of crunching orange and red on a joyous fall morning. More than simple brown envelopes, each object held power, each one potentially a fresh slash with the sword. These items were Holden. They were the closest thing to being with him, and being with him was agony because he was always being taken away. His death repeated over and over with every dead thing. I think that's enough.
It's so strange how like I love that section of the book, but it's so, yeah. Thank you.
Everybody has their own objects. You know, everybody has their own smells. For such a long time, I would open the linen closet and he would just be there, just that smell. It was just, you know, those instant things that just transport you.
Yeah, I love that phrasing. When a cup of tea is no longer a cup of tea, it's all so much more. Thanks, Tara. Thanks for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So you know, we've sort of been introduced, we're getting to know you, right? And we're getting to know Holden. And there are a number of characters that we get to know throughout the course of the book. But of course, they're not like characters, they're real people. And two of them are constant throughout, but also supporting, right? In like literal and figurative ways. And it's that's, you know, I'm thinking of Cam, your husband Cam, and of Lila, your daughter. And so, you know, just talking a bit more about thinking about the impact, the way that things impact the whole family, right? What kind of conversations did you have in the lead up to writing the book? And then after publication? Yeah,
It's interesting, Dan, that you say the whole family, because I was putting away Christmas decorations, and I've kept as much of Holden's handwriting and things. And I found a little tag, because every year we put up Holden's stocking and we put gift wrap cans of spray paint in his stocking. And it says to Holden, love the whole family, but it's HOLE. And I think of us as the whole family quite often.
Yeah.
The whole family. Anyway, neither of them have read the book. They Cam I've written a number of essays and I've asked him to read them, and he just can't. He's so emotional. He just starts to cry. Like, he can't even watch a movie where someone is about to get dumped by their girlfriend. Like, he has to get up and leave. I'm not even exaggerating. So for him to read this, before it was going to print, I said, you know, you have to read this because it's going to print and you are in here a lot. Yeah. And he just said, I trust you. It's okay. I lived it. I don't need to read about it. I know that your impressions of what happened are different than mine, and you are very much entitled to telling your story the way you want. I probably agree with, you know, some of it and disagree with other aspects of it, and I'm fine with it. Lila was 11 when Holden died. She's 19 now. She's in her second year of university. In the last few years, through COVID and whatnot, she struggled very much with anxiety, some clinical depression, and hasn't read it yet, but says she would like to when her studies allow. She has a lot of reading to do. She's studying psychology, funny enough. I think she'll probably read it in the summer. But she's also very supportive. They've been incredibly supportive. They watched how hard I worked on this book. They've been my champions all the way through. And they have been supported well by their communities and by their friends too. Like, Cam has his hockey buddies and his mountain bike buddies, and there's a core group of them that have really, really been there for him. You know, guys, they don't talk in the same way that women do, but they show up and they do things together, you know, and he's had that. And Lila's group of friends have also been very, very supportive of her. And she's taking some poetry and some creative writing classes too. So maybe there's been a little bit of an influence there. I'm not sure.
Sounds like it. Sounds like it. And I really appreciate you touching on that importance, how each of you, I mean, you had each other, but you also had your own individual circles of support that you leaned on. And again, if I'm thinking about like what we talk about in the Healing Hearts groups, it's about how do we expand our circle of support around us and identify people in our lives who maybe serve different roles in those moments. The person who, you know, is only, you know, your go-to person for a laugh, like over, and when you need that laugh, like that's who you're going to call. Because to only be counting on each other to hold each other up, it's like a lot of pressure when you're all in grief at the same time in different ways. Yeah. So I really appreciate you talking about that.
I don't think I helped him at all. I think it was very one-sided. I tried to help Lila. as best as I could. Cam was kind of on his own. I'm like, buddy, you're an adult. He helped me all day, every day. And I know I was aware of how much strain was on our marriage. I was aware of how much strain was on, my sibling relationships and my parents. Like, bless their hearts, they just couldn't do it. They could not help me grieve in the way that I needed. They are not emotional people, or at least not outwardly emotional people. I'm sure they're very emotional, but it was not coming to me in the way that I wanted. So, there can be a lot of disappointment associated with how people are present for you. And I think it's really important to understand that not everybody is equipped. I was not equipped to help Cam. He, through a very natural way, was well equipped to help me and still does. And I thank my lucky stars every day for the fact that our marriage survived, because I know it very well could have not. And I know that's very common.
Yes.
Which would have been another huge loss.
Yes. Yeah. Another huge loss, which I just learned a term for, shadow loss, is something my friend Liz, who you met, Liz Wormland, Grief Stories, introduced me to this term of shadow loss. And it's the loss of things, of experiences, of entities outside of a person, an individual.
Right.
And I bet if we, thought about how the shadow loss is associated with your experience of losing Holden, there's a bunch I'm sure we could unpack. Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted I love it when you are given language for something that, like, you're feeling it and you've experienced it, but you don't know what it is. And so when she said this term shadow loss, I was like, yeah, this is it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I just wanted to offer that, because what you were talking about, what you were sharing, made me think of it.
Thank
you. Okay, so you published this beautiful book, and you shared it with the world, right? Which is significant in and of itself. But especially out in Vancouver, which, like you said, is, very much an epicenter, even though we know, and we in Stronger Together Canada and Healing Hearts and Mom Stop the Harm, we know all too well this is a national crisis. Yeah. But in Vancouver, you're a public figure there to a certain degree. Like, you're a broadcaster for a number of years, right? And so you have a certain level of profile. And now that's being combined with your sharing of this experience of losing your son to overdose in Vancouver. And we can tie all of this, and you talked about this, I think, a little bit at the beginning, where you can tie that to inadequate mental health systems and lack of information for family members and lack of supports and, failed drug policy and decades of messaging that perpetuated this stigma and shame around drug use. And it's so in the context of where we are tonight in terms of, our association with Mom Stop the Harm, we have sort of like a 3 pillars, right? We do like advocate, educate, support. And so as a public figure who's lost a child to overdose, which remains a national public health crisis, it's in the headlines, even though, for those of us who are suffering and in it, we don't think it's in the headlines enough as it is, but it is out there a lot. And so I'm just wondering if you feel a pressure, or is there a pressure that you feel to be out there on the front lines of activism? And what does that pressure feel like, and how do you navigate it?
I don't know. There's no manual for something like this.
Yeah.
One of the big advantages is that I have a lot of friends still working in media, and those connections have allowed me to really be all over the place in terms of promoting this book. And that's an advantage. A disadvantage is that I'm all over the place promoting this book, in that it's painful. I would rather not be publicly talking about the death of my child, but I felt that because of that experience, I had a sense of responsibility where I could use the voice that I have and try and show what I could through art. I know advocacy has a number of different forms, and I feel like people like you and your organization, Mom Stop the Harm, and other groups and individuals are working very hard with policy, for example, and treatment and harm reduction. And there are a lot of people working and pushing against a very big, heavy rock and trying to roll it up a very steep hill. That is not my wheelhouse. I wanted to approach this through language, because as a radio broadcaster, language is an area that I feel comfortable in and that I am interested in working in still more to expand. And so in educating myself, I did the best job I could to create some kind of, I don't really see it as a legacy for Holden, but something, some object that represents a part of him. Nothing could represent him completely. And everyone has their own way of creating legacy for people they've lost. And those are all very, very personal. But I felt compelled to do it in this way. And I've been approached by, or, contacted and received notes from a number of people who've said, we share experiences. I have a similar experience, but I'm not able to articulate it. And I've highlighted many, many, many passages in your book that I feel are also true for me. And I remember reading books feeling like, they're saying something that I feel, but I can't articulate it. And so I tried to work really hard and stay with those really uncomfortable feelings until I could articulate them in a way that I thought pushed the boundary of what I was able to understand. And hopefully other people with similar losses, or even, I don't know, just people who like to read books, can have the experience, that feeling you have when something clicks into place and you're like, yeah, they get what I'm thinking, or something just transpired here. And really, a book is a relationship between a writer and a reader, and it doesn't matter. It spans time and place and demographic and orientation. It spans everything. If Sense and Sensibility is still being read by teenage girls, there's nothing in between. So I'm just hoping, and I'm grateful that people who've read this book have connected with it in a way that helps them feel maybe understood or seen, or that they are not the only person feeling this way. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And that act of writing and sharing in that way, I think, is an act of activism in its own right, and an act of resistance in its own right. And the reason why I really wanted us to talk about that is because I wanted to offer it to people, because I think sometimes there is a pressure and expectation that you are going, many of us take our grief and we turn it into advocacy or activism or action of a certain kind. But I just always, I have a lot of conversations with people who say, like, I'm just not there, or that's just not me. And so I really want, I knew the answer already to that question because of our previous conversations, but I think it's really important for people who have lost a loved one, or lost a child, to hear that message, that to give yourself permission, right? That you find your own way, your own path, and to not, and to give yourself permission to release that expectation or that pressure, and to find your own way to do your act of resistance, which is what I think you have done in many ways here.
One of the things that was really important for me to do, and the aspect that I tried to work really hard on, was to show as many of Holden's qualities as I could, because I only know one person who died from overdose, but there are thousands and thousands and thousands, and they have positive qualities and negative qualities. These are all human beings. They are They are conflicted people. And I wanted to show that nice people do drugs, not nice people do drugs. Accidents happen to all kinds of people. We are a very, I'm going to say affluent, although I don't feel very affluent right now, but I have a house, I have a car, we live in Vancouver, we have, food and security. And so I'm an affluent white lady in the suburbs. This is not people hunched over in doorways in puddles in the downtown east side. It infuriates me. And actually, I've seen a shift lately in the images that are being shown in media around drug use and substance use disorder, and the way that people are being spoken to much more respectfully and openly, and not patronized. I am seeing a shift. And I've had to say to people, you're not running that image. Remove that picture of the syringe in the puddle.
Yes.
It's not relevant. It's actually kind of lame. Like, it's very cliche. You guys need to up your game. And so those kind of shifts I am seeing happening. So I guess, through talking about it, there is a bit of advocacy. I certainly had a lot of shame. I didn't want to talk about it. I didn't want anyone to know how Holden had died for a long time, because I didn't want to know. I didn't want to admit it because it felt dirty and shameful and all of those things. And I had to understand that it clearly isn't. And in order for me to, and this book has helped me understand that.
Yeah. Thank you for naming all of those things. And that, the pushback on something like an image that's being associated with a story that you're included in, that 100% is advocacy, 100% is activism. We make those calls to editors all the time to say, do better. So
yeah, like one just came out today, TELUS, which is TELUS national?
Yeah.
Okay, so TELUS Talks podcast, and on the title it says whatever, opioid crisis. And I'm like, would you please change the title? The common language is overdose crisis. It's not just opioids that are killing people. It's all kinds of drugs and all kinds of problematic situations. So would you please change this? This is the current language.
Yeah.
And please use substance use disorder rather than addiction and things like that. So, it's, I guess I am a little advocate.
You are a little advocate, because language matters. And it's
language matters a lot.
I mean, you as a writer know that more than most, but it does matter. And so I am grateful for you raising that.
Yeah, that was, I wrote an op-ed piece in the Globe and Mail in the fall, around when my book came out, and it was about how language can be a form of harm reduction.
Yes, 100%. Yeah. I know we want to give space for folks to ask questions and things, so I'm just going to wrap up, and you sort of led me right to where I was hoping we would get for the wrap up, when you talked about, Holden being a fully formed person, like with a multifaceted person. And so what I was thinking was, so often the focus of our conversations is on the policy piece, it's on the pain, it's on the loss. That anyone on this call who's lost a loved one knows that we also share a need, like you said at the very beginning, to keep our loved ones alive, right? To speak their name and to make sure people know who they are, who they were, who they are. And to really know the whole person. And so that's one of the gifts of this book, right? Is that it lets us get to know Holden in a really fulsome way. So I thought we'd wrap up by asking you to share with us, especially for those of us who haven't read the book yet, what you want us to know about him.
So Holden was 21 when he died. And I remember being 21, and trying to figure out, what the hell am I doing here? And he was doing that. He struggled with his mental health, but he also was a person who was trying to become what he could be. And that's how I like to think of him. He was an incredible artist. He was just intuitively talented in an artistic way. He lived his life like his life like an artist. Like, oh my God, you could not get him to do anything conventional. So frustrating, but that's also, you can't separate the two, I don't think. He was a very good brother. He was a thoughtful person. He was very funny, hilarious, fun. Like, how some people are funny, yuck, and some people are super intelligent funny. He was the second one. His humor was very sophisticated. He was a great swimmer. He loved to go for walks. He had a long torso and short legs. He said he had a dad bod. I'm just thinking of random things he was starting to lose his hair. He didn't seem to mind that too much though. And when he grew a beard, it had a reddish color to it. I'm enjoying talking about him. Yeah, he was a really, really cool person. He was a cool person.
Cool person.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing your cool person with us.
Thank you for asking about him.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love our conversations. I loved this conversation. And yeah, if you're ready, we'll open it. I've been so focused on our chat that I haven't been looking at the Q&A in the chat, but I'm sure Antoinette has been keeping an eye on things. And how do we want to do this?
Well, and there has been some conversation, just a lot of people really resonating at different points, Tara, as they're like, yes, I get this. Yes, that's me. Thank you. I don't feel so alone. So there's lots of positive feedback within the chat. We do have Sandra that wanted just a couple of minutes. Sandra has her hand up and just wanted to say something. Sandra, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for this book, Tara. It's I guess a little less than 400 pages. It's pretty big. I'm a professor. I'm a retired professor, so I don't write the way you write, but I'm a writer myself, and I know what was involved in creating that. It's a tough slog, and I read it in phases, and I'm usually pretty good at my reading. I can, conquer books quite well. I lost my son, my only child, who had just turned 22. In about 2 weeks' time, it'll be the second anniversary. Are you there?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, great. And I wanted to say that, as a lot of people here will probably also be saying, it is, as you know, an incredibly lonely, isolating experience. When you see someone else write with this level of, I don't know, profoundness, that's what it was for me. You don't feel the loneliness as much for those few hours that you're immersed in the book, or few minutes. And in fact, what you really do see is patterns between your loved one and my loved one and all of these other ones out there. And the confirmation of seeing patterns is very validating, as opposed to, this is just me, this is just us, this is just our horror. So that's number one, is what it gave me in terms of that sense of part of something, right? I'm not a creative writer, I'm an academic writer. And it has helped me to appreciate creative writing so much more. And yeah, this is kind of like my introduction to it in many ways. I too, after this experience, certainly not at your level, have started writing, particularly in the last 4 months, about my son. I wrote a CBC News app that went across the country. I got interviewed by CBC News here in Winnipeg in their local afternoon show. I did things that I really never imagined myself doing in these last 2 years. Again, as a form of honoring our sons. I mean, I think that's what it is honoring our sons, our children. And I've written in newsletters, and there is something really validating again about doing that. So anybody who has an interest in doing that or thinks they might be able to do it, it goes a long way towards healing. Then the last thing I just want to say is that the level of data, the level of research that you were willing to go to, interviewing these individuals that you did, incredibly, incredibly powerful. And I just finished really my last session with the book about 10 days ago. And it's now propelled me to think that I want to go. I could never do what you've done in that level of interrogation, sort of, I couldn't do it. But my son was an avid volunteer for an organization that houses people with developmental disabilities. He put in over 600 hours.
Wow.
And now I know the two names of the young men that the residents he spent time with. And I'm going to find a way to go meet those two young men and just see what my son saw. Sorry, long story short, my son died of severe mental illness and substance use disorder, just about the same age as yours. Their lives were not the same. They were different, different men, but the love and the power of writing this stuff is phenomenal. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sandra. It's good to hear somebody else that has read Tara's book that can kind of validate and just be able to really acknowledge the work that went into the writing. And we do have one other person that has their hand up. Please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box as well. I think that it's a very tender subject, so I just wanted to open it up so that people know that they can absolutely put their questions in the chat. And Michelle.
Hi, Tara, Missy, and Antoinette. I just wanted to share with you a little bit about my son, Tanner. He was an amazing person, very loved, came from a very good home, and he smoked pot back when it wasn't legal. And, we had some difficulties around that. And then he tried ketamine, and I lost my son forever, unfortunately. And he died at the age of 25 on the downtown east side. He was a real person. He was unhoused at times, and I have a hard time when people don't see people from the downtown east side as real people. And I just wanted to express my feelings on that, because my son did die from fentanyl poisoning he didn't know there was fentanyl in his methamphetamine, and he was loved and by his 4 other siblings, and we miss him. But I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you for sharing, Michelle. Thanks for sharing about Tanner.
I'm not sure if anybody else has any questions for Tara or for Missy or for myself. I did put in the chat earlier that in Edmonton, we do have a Healing Hearts for Men group that meets in person. So if anybody knows anybody or is in that area, and I did put in the chat, if you're not part of a Healing Hearts group and you would like that support, you can go to our website, healingheartscanada.org. Lorna, I see you've got your hand up. Lorna, I'm not sure if you can hear us. I'm not sure if you're talking, but you're on mute.
I was babbling away.
Okay.
I didn't unmute myself. Just want to say thank you, Antoinette, for hosting the meeting, and Missy for moderating. And a big thank you to Tara for sharing her son with us. I have not yet read the book. I just got introduced to it when I was reading about this webinar. But I wanted to just really thank you so much for bravely stepping forward with your story. And I look forward to meeting Holden through your words. A couple of things I wanted to thank you specifically for calling out broadcasters and upgrading their language. I think I'm also work in media. I'm an independent filmmaker. I've done documentaries for most broadcasters. And I know initially when I started, it wasn't clear to me that I could just send an email or pick up the phone and talk to somebody in the media. But I think everybody in this webinar have the right to do that. If they see inappropriate language, if they need to correct a stat or a fact in their community, please do speak up. So thanks, Tara, for raising that if Telesoptic or Telus, I don't know what the program was that you saw, but the fact that you corrected them. And often I find that the people I'm speaking to, the journalists, do appreciate that, and they don't come at it, meaning to give harm, but they do appreciate the upgrade of their language. The second thing I want to do is to thank you for publicizing your book. I wrote a chapter for a book called Always With Me. Parents talk about the loss of a child. And I did this. Yeah, it's a good book. I'll put it in the chat. And my chapter was called I Can't Imagine It. I wrote that phrase because I heard it so many times, and I see it all the time in our Mom Stop the Harm groups, and where people will say, I can't imagine it. But when I delivered the chapter of the book, it was published, and then I froze, and the editor was in Ottawa, a friend of a friend, and Mom Stop the Harm hosted a reading in Victoria, but then I completely froze. I didn't host a reading here in Edmonton. So the fact that you're bravely going forward and speaking about the book and getting others like Missy to and Antoinette to heightenedly promote your book is really great, and I look forward to reading it.
Thank you, Lorna. I'll just say, as a person who was formerly in media, you get a lot farther by being nice. Like I understand anger, I have a lot of it, but if you can, if you want to find ways to, and by the way, language changes all the time, and everybody is short-staffed. So I don't think anyone is intentionally using outdated language, but we can help by gently suggesting this is the language that's being used now. It goes a long way. And I don't know. So was that Lorna? Sorry, I didn't. Yeah. In the book, I do mention that term, I can't imagine. And I think what I wrote is actually you can imagine. And that's what makes this so scary. It's language, it's kind of an outdated term. Or the other one that I really get a lot of is there are no words. Well, there's lots of words. There's 100,000 words about it. I think that just means that people aren't really willing to make the effort to spend the time thinking about it, or not able to access that emotionally.
Okay, Christine.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Tara, I read your book. I rushed home today to actually finish the last 40 pages. It's taken me on a dark journey. So many parts of it I could relate to, and other parts I kept thinking how blessed you were and are to be able to track the path of your son through his years of struggling with substances. And some of the things you said, like you remember his jaw, like the way his jawbone went, things like that. Really, it's such a simple little sentence, but I remember my son Aaron's jaw, and he had a beautiful jaw. So, but I didn't know much about him for the last 5 years. He was, the odd text I would get, and I met him a couple of times over COVID. So I don't have all those people you had to, track down his life in the last 4 or 5 years. So that part of the book, I kept thinking how fortunate, like bittersweet fortunate, that you are and were to be able to interview all these people. The one person that I did meet after he died, and the police told me where he lived, so we had to clean out the room and everything. That fellow, while we were cleaning out the room, was taken away to jail. So I can't even interview him because now I've heard that he died of a fentanyl overdose too. So I'm kind of, I want to find people to interview like you did, but I'm kind of stuck in it all. So I don't know where I'll go from here, but I'm going to see how I can, try and find somebody that knew him in these last few years. But it actually, the book's given me a little bit of hope that maybe I can find people and I'll get to know a little bit about him, because I really, he was a great guy. He was in the Navy, he had his black belt in karate, he was an artist. He was so much more until that horrible monster got a hold of him. And he died of an accidental fentanyl overdose. So yeah, your book is difficult, but I needed it. So thank you.
You're very welcome. And thank you for sharing your story. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Lynn.
She's just, somebody's.
Oh, hang on, Lorna, you're on. Lynn, do you want to unmute?
Can I just interject something for Christine? Often I didn't have very much tenacity at first, but then later on, I sort of got a little more traction. And one of the things I learned is that no is just kind of almost a request for more information, like in terms of freedom of information and police sources and that kind of thing, medical sources. At first, I was always told, no, we can't really, that's personal information. He's an adult, we can't. I would try another person or try a different email or try tell a different story or find someone who cared. There's no way I should have been given Holden's police records and his psychological records. That was not protocol, but I just kept trying until I found someone who was willing to, or I would just kind of look for loopholes or just pretend I was stupid, and whatever you feel at the time can help you get some information you're looking for is worth it.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll remember those words.
Okay, we have about 10 minutes left and we have 3 more people with their hands up. Lynn, were you able to unmute?
Yes.
Okay.
My son, Brian, he passed away 3 months ago today of heroin overdose. What I wanted to say was 3 days before he passed, he got out of rehab. And after he did pass, he had a journal, a book that he had at rehab, and I read it. It was quite interesting. Sorry, it was very interesting to read how he truly felt, because it was how he really felt. I didn't know he was really lonely. There's a lot of things in there that I was surprised to read, but sometimes you just don't know. My son lived with us, and there were so many things that we were not aware of. And sorry, but that's all I need to say. I just wanted you to know I really enjoyed your talk today, Tara. I will be reading your book.
Thanks, Lynn. I'm so glad you have that journal. You know, handwriting. I was talking with my sister about this. Kids now don't actually do a lot of handwriting. And you know how when you receive a letter or you see something, you can tell just from a few words who it is, who's writing. And that is a form of signature. It's a form of communication. So regardless of what the journal says, and I hope that gives you some comfort, you have his hands, you know, you have his thoughts and whatever he felt was important to him at the time. And that's very valuable.
So true. It's like that bittersweet insight that you see. Yeah. Wendy.
Hey, ladies. Thank you, Tara, for such a lovely evening. I just wanted to take a moment to share my experience after this passing of my son, Quinn. Quinn, when he was in grade 4, my husband and I had already been divorced for quite a few years. He decided when he was in grade 4 that he wanted to go and try living with his dad. And it was reasonably successful, and he spent the rest of his childhood growing up in a different community than where I lived. We were close, but consequently, I didn't really get to know a lot of Quinn's acquaintances because they were from all out of area. But when Quinn passed away, I was barraged with messages and people making contact with me. And they were all people that Quinn had impacted in one way or the other. And as I know a lot of you probably have experienced, at the time of Quinn's passing, our life was really chaotic, and it was getting harder and harder to see glimpses of the lovable, beautiful young man that Quinn was, because of his substance use disorder. And the privilege of making contact with all of those young people who took the time to reach out to me and tell me what Quinn meant to them, what Quinn did for them, how Quinn influenced them. It was everything. It was everything. And it may never ever go into a book, but there's stories and interactions and words that carry me to this day. And I think it is such a treasure, after we lose someone, to have the opportunity to make those connections, to see your person from someone else's perspective.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. And we have time for one more person, and Susan, you had your hand up.
Thank you. Thank you, Tara. This is most welcoming to see you again. Tara's a friend of mine. My daughter and I have a very tiny part in her book, but Tara had a very big part in our journey. So I haven't lost my daughter to overdose or death, but she is part of the downtown East End. And I just want to say how grateful I am for Tara's book, that how it helped me. I read it this fall, and what it did for me was to help me to have more compassion for my daughter and where she's at. And it really helped me, Tara, so that I can continue hoping that I'll hold her in my arms again one day, as I haven't seen her for 3 years. And we have no contact, but Tara and I keep looking for her. Anyway, I just recommend the book to all of you and hope that you will gain so much as I did and more from reading Tara's book and understanding her journey as well. Thanks again, Tara, and for everybody participating in this forum. Thank you.
Thanks, Susan. So I'm just going to do just a couple of closing words, but before I do that, I just wanted to, ask Missy or Tara if you have any final last few words that you want to say before I kind of do my piece. And for those of you that are still on, I will just put in the chat, if you are not part of a Holding Hope or a Healing Hearts support group and want to be, I'll put the website again in the chat, and then I'll put the Holding Hope also, and those are for people that have loved ones still struggling. So Missy or Tara, any last few words before I do my gratitude to both of you?
I'll give Tara the last word. I'll just very quickly say how grateful I am to everyone who attended tonight, held space for Tara and I as we chatted, but also for each other, and to everyone who shared and spoke the names of your loved ones. I'm really grateful, and I just want to say that I see each of you, and will keep speaking the names of those that you love. And I'm just really, I love to be part of this community. No one wants to join this club, but it's a wonderful community to be part of when you need it. So thanks to all of you.
Yeah, I like to express my gratitude as well. Hearing people like Christine and Lynn and Wendy and my good friend Susan speak about these very, very fresh losses, and to be present here and part of a community. It's a huge gift to me. I spent a lot of time by myself in a room with a computer, and without really knowing what this was going to be or the impact. We started off talking a little bit about mothers being insane, and we're compelled to do things. And I just decided to follow that urge. And this is where I've ended up. It doesn't mean that it's easier. It just means that it's different. And one of the things that I found at the beginning was that I did not think I could survive. And when I saw people who had lost children 3 years before, 5 years before, 7 years before, I realized it might be possible. And now for us, it's been 7.5 years since Holden died. So if anyone can look at me and understand that it's possible to survive, then maybe that's something too.
Thank
you all so much.
Thank you, Tara. That point you bring up, I hear that a lot in the different pieces and different conversations, and that by hearing somebody that has, been past a year or 2 years, 5 years down the road, that you can survive, and that is a way that you bring hope, and all of us that have done that bring hope to others. I just want to really truly thank Missy and Tara for both sharing your heart. I mean, both of you were very open and vulnerable. That's one of the things I most love about both of you. And when we're able to do this, and people that come on and share, and we're recording this so it'll go on the Mom Stop the Harm YouTube channel, it's helping people know they are not alone. And so all of you that are still with us, it's like you're not alone in this. And I also just wanted to make a comment. Missy, you had given Tara some feedback about different ways to advocate, and writing her book or calling an editor. Like, you know, there's many different ways to advocate. So whatever is in your heart and what's right for you to do to be able to do that, there's space and room, and it's needed in our communities all across Canada. I put those websites in the chat, and I just wanted to highlight one that we have coming up on February the 9th, which is it's a segment called Art with Anna. And Anna, if you're not artistic, that's what the group is for those that are, because I took it and I'm not artistic, and it's a different way to move the heaviness and the heart and the energy that's inside. So as your modality, Tara, you know, as you were taking it and doing your research, that was what worked for you. So if anybody's interested, there's Art with Anna, and you need minimal supplies. You can use what you have at home, and it's a way to process. And she's amazing at doing that, and she'll take us all through that. And I just want to end on just saying that I heard a really good quote, and it's not mine, and I'm just using it from an elder that I know, and she shared that stories are medicine. And as we share, get emotional, as we share our stories, that's medicine that we share with one another. So I thank you all for sharing your stories, all those that spoke up. And as we share with one another and we share our stories, that's the medicine that we need. So so thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being here tonight. And if you found value and you want to share this when we have it on, we will have it on the YouTube channel. So I'm going to stop recording now.